They found her at the bottom of the well at 3:17 a.m. on October 13, 1847. Sarah Morrison, beloved wife and mother of 3. Her body had been there for 6 days. But Sarah Morrison had been seen walking through town every single one of those 6 days. Sweeping drone shots reveal modern-day Millhaven Valley, Vermont. Mist clings to rolling hills as the camera slowly zooms in on a small, seemingly peaceful town. Welcome to Millhaven Valley, Vermont. Population 1,847. A town where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are currency, and where the past refuses to stay buried. 3 weeks ago, construction workers breaking ground for a new shopping center made a discovery that would shatter everything this community thought they knew about their history. Shaky phone footage shows the construction site. Workers gather around a hole, pointing and gesturing frantically. What they found wasn't just bones. It wasn't just artifacts. What they found was proof that the Morrison family massacre of 1847, the tragedy that founded this town's darkest legend, was not what anyone believed it to be. Wind howls through trees as the camera moves through a dense forest, branches scraping against the lens. For 177 years, the people of Millhaven Valley have lived with a story of madness, of tragedy, of a family beloved by all who fell victim to something dark and unexplainable. But stories like water have a way of finding the cracks, and the truth has been seeping through for generations. An old newspaper headline fills the screen. Morrison family tragedy shakes Millhaven. Well poisoned, family dead, Thomas Morrison. Arrived in Millhaven Valley in the spring of 1845 with his wife Sarah and their 3 children, Elizabeth 15, James 13, and little Mary, just 7 years old. They were everything a frontier community could ask for. Thomas, at 35 years old, was a skilled blacksmith with years of experience. Sarah was known for her healing herbs, and the children were the light of everyone's lives. Artist renderings show the Morrison family, sepia-toned and warm. Elizabeth had her mother's gentle hands and helped deliver half the babies born in Millhaven between 1845 and 1847. At just 17 when she died, she had already assisted in the births of 12 babies. James could fix anything: watches, farming equipment, broken hearts when sweethearts quarreled, and Mary had a laugh that could chase away the darkest Vermont winter. The warmth suddenly drains from the scene. They built their homestead on the hill overlooking town, and behind their small wooden house Thomas dug a well that would become their lifeline and their curse. Modern-day shots show an overgrown hill. The remnants of stone foundation are barely visible through decades of wild growth. The well was 45 feet deep. Thomas hit water at 30 feet, crystal clear, cold even, in summer with a taste the townspeople described as blessed. Within months, neighbors were walking up the hill daily, carrying buckets and jugs because the Morrison well had the sweetest water anyone had ever tasted. The gentle creaking of a well pulley and water splashing softly fills the air. Sarah Morrison would lower her wooden bucket every morning at sunrise and every evening at sunset. The ritual became as regular as church bells. But on October 7, 1847, something changed. Sarah lowered her bucket and pulled up something that would destroy everything. The sound stops abruptly. Dead silence. She pulled up blood. Dark, rusty water pours from an old wooden bucket. What happened next defies explanation. What happened next challenges everything we think we know about reality, about death, about the thin veil between our world and whatever lies beyond, because the Morrison family died that night, all of them. The official record is clear. Thomas, Sarah, Elizabeth, James, and little Mary Morrison were found dead in their beds on the morning of October 8, 1847. Wind moves through empty rooms. But for 6 more days, the people of Millhaven Valley saw them, spoke to them, shared meals with them. The children played in the town square. Sarah tended to sick neighbors. Thomas worked in his forge. For 6 impossible days, the Morrison family continued their lives as if nothing had happened. A heartbeat grows louder, and then on October 13th, Sarah's body was found at the bottom of the well, followed by Thomas, then Elizabeth, then James, And finally, little Mary, her small body floating face up, her eyes still open, still staring at a sky she couldn't possibly see. The construction site appears again now at night. Floodlights illuminate the excavation. Something metallic glints in the earth. 5 bodies in a well. A family that died twice. And now, 177 years later, we're about to discover that the Morrison family's story was never finished. Warm sunrise breaks over Millhaven Valley. Birds sing. The contrast is stark and deliberate after the darkness. To understand how love can turn to horror, we must first understand just how deeply the Morrisons were woven into the heart of Millhaven Valley. This wasn't just about a family who lived here. This was about a family who became the soul of this place. Inside the Millhaven Historical Society, Margaret Chen, 67, town historian, sits surrounded by old books and photographs. Margaret speaks, with evident fondness. My great-great-grandmother used to tell stories about Sarah Morrison. She said Sarah had hands that could draw sickness out of a body like drawing poison from a wound. There wasn't a person in Millhaven who hadn't been touched by Sarah's kindness in some way. An artist recreation shows Sarah Morrison tending to a sick child, her hands glowing softly with warmth. The historical records paint a picture of a woman ahead of her time. Sarah Morrison kept detailed journals of her herbal remedies, journals that modern botanists have studied and found to be remarkably advanced for 1840s frontier medicine. Faded journal pages appear, handwritten in careful script. One entry reads, July 23, 1846. Little William Hatcher's fever broke today after 3 days of willow bark tea and cool compresses from the well. His mother wept with relief. I thank God for the gifts he has given me and for the pure water he has blessed our home with. The camera lingers on the word well in Sarah's handwriting. That's good. Even in those early, happy days, it was central to everything. Thomas had dug it by hand through the rocky Vermont soil, a backbreaking labor of love for his family. But what he found down there was something special. Dr. James Whitmore, hydrogeologist from University of Vermont, gestures to geological survey maps. The Morrison property sits on top of what we now know as a natural spring that's been flowing for thousands of years. The water table there is fed by an underground river system that originates in the Green Mountains. But here's what's interesting and disturbing about the geological surveys we've done. He pauses, clearly uncomfortable. The water that comes up from that location has mineral properties I've never seen before. High concentrations of quartz crystals, unusual electromagnetic signatures. If I didn't know better, I'd say that water was charged with something. Modern-day footage shows the old Morrison property. A metal detector scans the ground, beeping steadily. But in 1845, the Morrisons didn't need scientific instruments to know their water was special. The entire community felt it. Within months of the well's completion, something extraordinary began happening in Millhaven Valley. Margaret Chen holds an old ledger book. The town records from 1845 to 1847 are unlike anything before or since. Crop yields increased by 300%. Not a single child died from illness in those 2 years, in a time when child mortality was heartbreakingly common. Even the elderly seemed to live longer, healthier lives. She flips through pages of meticulously kept records, and everyone who drank from the Morrison well reported the same thing: better sleep, more energy, and dreams. Vivid, beautiful dreams that people remembered for years afterward. Soft recreation shows townspeople walking up the hill to the Morrison house carrying buckets and jugs, smiling and chatting. The daily pilgrimage to the Morrison well became more than just collecting water. It became a community ritual. Neighbors would meet on the path, share news, help elderly residents carry their heavy buckets. Children would play in the Morrisons' yard while their parents filled their containers. Artist recreation shows the Morrison children. Elizabeth reads to younger children. James teaches a boy how to whittle. Mary picks flowers. Elizabeth Morrison was 17 when she died, but in her short life, She had already assisted in the births of 12 babies. The midwife, Mrs. Adelaide Foster, wrote in her diary that Elizabeth had an intuitive understanding of childbirth that surpassed women twice her age. A diary entry appears in different handwriting. The Morrison girl has hands blessed by the Almighty. When complications arise, she seems to know exactly what to do before I can even assess the situation. It's as if she can sense the baby's distress before it becomes apparent to the rest of us. Frank Morrison, 45, a local resident with no relation to the original family, shifts uncomfortably in his chair. Look, I've lived here my whole life, and I've heard the stories. My grandmother used to say that the Morrison children weren't quite normal. Not in a bad way, but they were different. Elizabeth could touch a person and know if they were sick before they knew it themselves. James could fix things that shouldn't have been fixable. Mechanical things, yes, but also other things. When asked what kind of other things, Frank pauses. Broken marriages, feuding neighbors. He had a way of bringing people together, of making them remember why they cared about each other. And little Mary, he trails off, clearly troubled. They said Mary could see things, future things. She'd tell people about visitors coming before they arrived, about storms before clouds appeared. Everyone thought it was charming. Looking back, maybe it should have been terrifying. Sunset falls over the Morrison property. The shadows grow longer, and the warmth of the earlier scene starts to fade. For 2 years, the Morrison family lived like guardian angels over Millhaven Valley. Their well provided not just water, but prosperity, health, and hope to everyone who drank from it. The townspeople didn't just love the Morrisons, they depended on them in ways they didn't fully understand. Artist recreation shows Thomas Morrison working in his forge. The fire casts dancing shadows on the walls. Thomas Morrison's blacksmith shop became the unofficial heart of the community. Men would gather there not just for metalwork, but for counsel. Thomas had a reputation for wisdom beyond his 35 years, an ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. Rhythmic hammering on metal grows slower and more ominous, but wisdom can be a dangerous thing, and gifts that seem too good to be true usually are. Sarah Morrison's journal appears again, this time focusing on entries from late 1847, September 15, 1847. The dreams have changed. Where once I dreamed of light and growth, now I dream of depth, of darkness beneath the earth. Thomas says I'm imagining things, but I swear the water tastes different, heavier, as if it carries the weight of something old. Wind moves through trees. 3 weeks later, Sarah Morrison pulled up a bucket of blood from the well that had given life to an entire community. And in that moment, everything the Morrisons had built, everything they had given, everything they had meant to the people of Millhaven Valley began to turn into something unspeakable. The hammering stops abruptly. The same sunrise shot appears. But now, it looks different. The light seems harsher, the shadows deeper. The birds sound discordant. September 1847. The leaves were just beginning to turn when Adelaide Foster, the town midwife, made an entry in her diary that would be the first recorded sign that something was terribly wrong with the Morrison family. A handwritten diary entry appears, the ink slightly faded but still legible. September 22nd. Helped Elizabeth Morrison with the Hensley birth today. The child came easily, too easily. Elizabeth barely touched Mrs. Hensley's belly, and the baby simply emerged. Elizabeth's hands were cold as winter stones, and when she looked at me, her eyes, God forgive me, but her eyes looked ancient. Dr. Helena Reeves, a psychiatrist who specializes in historical trauma cases, explains, "What we're seeing in these accounts is a pattern consistent with what we might now recognize as dissociative episodes, but there are elements here that don't fit any known psychological framework. The entire family seems to have undergone a simultaneous psychological shift." Dr. Reeves has spent 3 years studying the Morrison case. Her conclusion is both fascinating and deeply disturbing. She leans forward, intense. In my professional opinion, the Morrison family was experiencing something far beyond individual mental illness. This was a shared psychological state, what we might call collective dissociation. But the trigger, that's what keeps me awake at night. Recreation shows Sarah Morrison at the well, lowering her bucket. But this time the rope seems to resist, as if something below is pulling back. The first sign came on September 28th, when Sarah Morrison visited the Blackwood farm to help with their sick cow. Martha Blackwood later told her neighbors that Sarah's touch had indeed healed the animal, but something else had changed. Ethel Blackwood, 78, great-great-granddaughter of Martha Blackwood, speaks with a shaky voice. My family passed down the story for generations. Great-great-grandmother Martha said that after Sarah touched our cow, it was healthy as could be. But every night after that, the cow would walk to the fence closest to the Morrison property and just stare. For hours. And its eyes. She shivers, visibly. Martha swore the cow's eyes had turned completely black. Not the pupils, the entire eye. And when other animals got near it, they'd back away like they sensed something wrong. Modern-day footage shows the old Blackwood property. The camera focuses on an old fence post, weathered and leaning. But it wasn't just the animals. The children of Millhaven Valley began exhibiting strange behavior around the Morrison family, behavior that their parents initially dismissed as childhood imagination. Margaret Chen holds a collection of letters. These are letters written by parents in late September 1847. Listen to this one from Rebecca Ashton. My Johnny refuses to play with James Morrison anymore. When I asked him why, he said James knows things he shouldn't know. When I pressed him, Johnny said James told him about the time Johnny broke Mother's vase last winter, but Johnny never told anyone about that, and we never discovered it was him. She shuffles through more letters. Here's another. Little Susan came home crying yesterday. She said Mary Morrison looked at her and told her about the baby sister she's going to have. But my husband and I haven't told anyone I'm with child. We've barely told ourselves. Artist recreation shows children playing in the town square, but now they're keeping their distance from the Morrison children, who stand apart, watching. With unnaturally still postures, October 1st, 1847, Thomas Morrison came to town to shoe horses at the livery stable, a job he'd done dozens of times before. But Samuel Pritchard, the stable owner, noticed something that made his blood run cold. Robert Pritchard, 52, descendant of Samuel Pritchard, recalls, according to the family stories, my ancestor Samuel watched Thomas Morrison work that day, and he swore that Thomas never once touched the red-hot iron with his bare hands, but he never used tongs either. Samuel said it was like Thomas could heat the metal just by looking at it, shaping it with his will instead of his hammer. The rhythmic, hammering sounds hollow, echoing strangely, and when Thomas was finished, Samuel noticed that every horse in the stable was pressed against the far wall, as far from Thomas as they could get. Horses that had known Thomas for 2 years were terrified of him. Recreation shows Thomas working at the forge, but his movements are too fluid, too precise. Sparks seem to bend around him rather than scatter randomly. October 3rd. Elizabeth Morrison delivered what would be her final baby, the carpenter's 4th child. The birth went smoothly, but what happened afterward would haunt the family for generations. Diane Carpenter Wells, 43, descendant of the Carpenter family, appears clearly disturbed. The family story goes that after Elizabeth delivered the baby, she held him for a moment and then told my ancestors that this child would live to be 93, would have 7 children of his own, and would die on a Tuesday morning in his sleep. A long pause. That baby was my great-great-grandfather, William Carpenter. He died on Tuesday, March 15, 1940, at the age of 93. He had exactly 7 children. The camera holds on her face as the implications sink in. But the most disturbing change in the Morrison family wasn't their newfound abilities. It was what those abilities were costing them. Sarah Morrison's journal appears, entries from early October 1847. October 4th, I barely sleep now. When I close my eyes, I see things, terrible things. The earth beneath our well opening like a mouth swallowing light itself. Thomas says I'm ill, but I know I'm not ill. I'm changing. We're all changing. Night falls over the Morrison property. A single light flickers in the window. October 5th. Elizabeth spoke to me today about her dreams. She dreams of every person she's helped, but in her dreams they're all underground in dark tunnels calling her name. James refuses to eat, says food tastes like earth, and Mary, sweet Mary, hasn't laughed in a week. She just stares at things that aren't there and whispers numbers. A child's voice, very faint, counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. October 6th. I understand now. The well hasn't been giving us something, it's been taking something. From us, from everyone who drinks from it. And what it's been taking, we can't get back. Dawn breaks over Millhaven Valley, but the light looks wrong. Too pale, too cold. October 7th, 1847. Sarah Morrison walked to the well at sunrise just as she had every morning for 2 years. She lowered the wooden bucket into the depths, listened to it hit the water 32 feet below, and began to pull it up, creaking rope and sloshing water, then sudden complete silence. When the bucket reached the surface, it was full of blood so dark it was nearly black, and floating in that blood was something that made Sarah Morrison scream for the first and last time in her adult life. A long pause. A human hand. Small, child-sized, with a birthmark on the wrist identical to the one on little Mary Morrison's arm. A bucket hit stone, echoing endlessly. Complete darkness. The sound of heavy breathing, panicked and shallow. October 7th, 1847. 6:47 a.m. Sarah Morrison's scream shattered the morning silence across Millhaven Valley. It was a sound that several townspeople later described as inhuman. Not the scream of a woman in distress, but the cry of something trapped between worlds. A woman's scream, distant but piercing, seems to echo from underground. Recreation. Shows Sarah Morrison staggering backward from the well, the bucket fallen at her feet, dark liquid seeping into the ground. Thomas Morrison found his wife collapsed beside the well, staring into the bucket with eyes that had gone. Completely white, not rolled back, but turned the color of milk. When he looked into the bucket himself, Thomas later wrote, he saw not blood, but water so clear it seemed to show him reflections of things that weren't there. Thomas Morrison's handwriting appears, shaky and desperate. October 7th evening. Sarah speaks of things beneath the earth, of voices calling from the deep. The children, God help me, the children answer those voices. I found them this afternoon standing around the well, holding hands, speaking words in a language I don't recognize. Artist recreation shows the 3 Morrison children standing in a circle around the well, their mouths moving in perfect synchronization, their eyes reflecting an impossible depth. I tried to pull them away, but they looked at me as if I were a stranger. Elizabeth spoke to me then, but her voice came from far away. We have to go down, Papa. We have to finish what we started. I don't know what she means. God help me, I'm afraid to know. Dr. Marcus Holloway, professor of religious studies and folklore at Middlebury College, explains, the Morrison case exhibits classic signs of what anthropologists call liminal psychosis, a psychological state where individuals exist between 2 realities. But what makes this case unique is the suggestion that the family may have actually accessed something beyond ordinary human perception. He leans forward, clearly fascinated and disturbed. The description of the children speaking in unison, in an unknown language, is particularly significant. In several mystical traditions, this is considered a sign of contact with, well, with entities that exist outside our normal understanding of reality. Night falls over the Morrison property. The windows of the house glow with an unnatural, flickering light. As darkness fell on October 7th, the people of Millhaven Valley began to notice something wrong. The Morrison house, which had always been a beacon of warmth and welcome, now cast shadows that seemed to move independently of the light sources. Margaret Chen shows a collection of testimonies. We have accounts from 7 different families about that night. Jeremiah Walsh was walking past the Morrison property around 8 o'clock when he heard singing, all 5 family members singing in harmony. But he said the harmonies were wrong, like the voices were coming from different depths underground. She pulls out another document. Rebecca Hartwell lived closest to the Morrisons. She said that around midnight she saw lights moving around the well, not lamplight but something that pulsed like a heartbeat, and she swore she could hear water being drawn from the well, over and over, though she never saw anyone operating the pulley. Recreation shows the Morrison family inside, their small house. They sit around their dinner table, but no one is eating. They're all staring toward the back of the house, toward the well. Thomas Morrison's final journal entry, written in the early hours of October 8th, provides the last first-hand account of what happened inside the Morrison house that night. Journal. Pages appear. The handwriting becomes increasingly erratic as the entry progresses. October 8th, near dawn. We have not slept. Cannot sleep. Well, it calls to us constantly now. Sarah walks to the window every few minutes and stares out at it. The children have been standing by the back door for hours, as if waiting for permission to go outside. The camera pulls back slightly to show more of the page. I tried to block the back door, but Elizabeth looked at me with eyes that belonged to someone else and said, "You cannot stop what has already begun, Papa. We made a promise." When I asked what promise, little Mary answered, "To feed the deep, to give back what was taken." The well at night, surrounded by an unnatural fog that seems to spiral downward into the opening. They're going to the well now. All of them. Sarah kisses me goodbye, but her lips are cold as stone. "Don't follow us, Thomas," she says. "This is not your burden, not yet. But I am their father, their husband. If they go into darkness, I go too. If this is madness, then let us be mad together. I hear the rope creaking. The bucket is going down. God forgive us all." The journal entry ends abruptly. A large ink blot obscures whatever might have been written next. Father Michael Torres, current priest at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Millhaven Valley, clearly struggles with the theological implications. I've read Thomas Morrison's journal many times. What disturbs me most isn't the suggestion of supernatural occurrence, but the idea that the family went willingly. This wasn't possession in any traditional sense. This was collaboration. A long pause. The Morrison family didn't fight whatever was happening to them. They embraced it, and that raises questions about the nature of good and evil that I'm not equipped to answer. Dawn breaks over Millhaven Valley on October 8, 1847, but the sunrise looks wrong, too red, like light filtered through blood. October 8, 1847, 6:15 a.m. Samuel Pritchard arrived at the Morrison property to discuss shoeing horses for the winter. What he found would change everything the people of Millhaven Valley thought they knew about life, death, and the thin places where the two intersect. Recreation shows Samuel Pritchard approaching the Morrison house. The front door stands open, swaying gently in a breeze that touches nothing else. The Morrison family was dead. All 5 bodies lay in their beds, fully clothed, hands folded peacefully over their chests. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence or poison. Dr. Edmund Whitfield, the town's physician, would later write that they appeared to have simply stopped living. Footsteps echo on wooden floors in empty rooms. But here's where the Morrison family's story moves beyond tragedy into something that defies rational explanation. Because while their bodies lay still and cold in their beds, the people of Millhaven Valley continued to see them, talk to them, and interact with them for 6 more days. Artist Recreation shows Elizabeth Morrison walking through town, smiling, and waving to neighbors who wave back without seeming to notice anything unusual. Elizabeth continued making her rounds to expectant mothers. James worked in his father's forge. Mary played in the town square with other children. Sarah tended her herb garden and drew water from the well twice daily. And Thomas walked through town with a smile on his face and emptiness behind his eyes, that some people later described as looking like holes in the world. The well again, now in daylight, but shadows seemed to pour out of it like dark water. For 6 impossible days, the Morrison family continued their lives as if death were just Another chore to be completed. But something else was happening. Something that would explain why their bodies were found not in their beds, where Samuel Pritchard had discovered them, but at the bottom of a well that had become a doorway between worlds. The sound of rope creaking, bucket splashing, echoing endlessly into darkness. The town square of Millhaven Valley, October 9th, 1847. Everything looks normal, peaceful even, but there's an underlying wrongness to the scene. Colors seem slightly faded, shadows fall at impossible angles. October 9th, 1847. One day after the Morrison family was found dead in their beds. Martha Hensley was hanging laundry when Elizabeth Morrison approached her with a smile and asked about the baby Elizabeth had delivered just weeks before. Recreation shows two women talking over a fence. Elizabeth Morrison looks perfectly normal, but she casts no shadow. Martha later told her husband that the conversation felt completely natural, until she realized that Elizabeth's clothes weren't moving in the wind, and when Elizabeth reached out to touch the baby's blanket, her fingers passed through the fabric like it wasn't there. Dr. Helena Reeves explains, mass hallucination is a documented psychological phenomenon, but what's described in the Morrison case goes beyond anything in the clinical literature. We're talking about dozens of people having shared interactive hallucinations that remained consistent across multiple witnesses and lasted for 6 days. She pauses, clearly troubled. But the most disturbing aspect isn't the hallucinations themselves. It's that the witnesses report the hallucinations providing information they couldn't have known. Elizabeth told Martha Hensley that her baby would develop a strawberry birthmark on his left shoulder within the week. The baby did. Artist Recreation shows James Morrison working in the blacksmith shop, but the fire burns without fuel, and the metal he shapes glows with its own internal light. October 10th. James Morrison spent the entire day at his father's forge, completing orders that several townspeople swore they hadn't actually placed. When they returned to collect their items that evening, they found their work completed to perfection. Horseshoes that fit better than any James had ever made while alive, tools balanced with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Robert Pritchard, descendant of the livery stable owner, explains, my great-great-grandfather Samuel kept detailed records of every job. According to his ledger, James Morrison completed 17 separate metalwork orders on October 10th, orders that should have taken a master blacksmith 3 weeks to finish, and every single piece was perfect, unnaturally perfect. He pulls out an old horseshoe darkened with age. This is one of the horseshoes James made that day. We've had it in the family for 177 years. Look at this. No rust, no wear, and it still rings like a bell when you strike it. Metal doesn't behave like this. Metal doesn't last like this. He taps the horseshoe with a hammer. The sound that emerges is pure, crystalline, and seems to echo longer than physics would allow. The Morrison house at twilight. Warm light glows in the windows. Smoke rises from the chimney, but something about the scene feels like a painting, rather than reality. But it was little Mary Morrison who provided the most disturbing evidence that something impossible was happening in Millhaven Valley. On October 11th, she approached 8-year-old Timothy Walsh while he was playing near the church. Recreation shows a small girl talking to a boy. The girl's lips move, but the sound seems to come from somewhere else entirely. According to Timothy's testimony, given when he was an adult, Mary told him 3 things. That his father would die in a logging accident the following spring, that Timothy would live to see flying machines carrying people through the sky, and that he should never, ever drink water from any well deeper than 30 feet. A long pause. Timothy Walsh's father died in a logging accident in April 1848. Timothy lived to see the first commercial airline flights in the 1920s. And Timothy Walsh never drank well water for the rest of his 93 years of life. Margaret Chen holds a faded photograph. This is Timothy Walsh in 1920, at age 81. He's one of the few people who lived through the Morrison incident and survived long enough to be photographed. Look at his eyes. You can see it there, the knowledge of something that shouldn't be possible. The photograph shows an elderly man with unusually bright, alert eyes that seem to hold depths of experience beyond his years. October 12th brought the most disturbing encounter of all. Sarah Morrison visited Adelaide Foster, the midwife, to discuss a difficult birth that hadn't happened yet. Wouldn't happen for another 3 weeks. Adelaide Foster's diary appears, the handwriting shaky and desperate. October 12th. Sarah Morrison came to see me today about the Carpenter birth. But Mrs. Carpenter isn't due for weeks, and she hasn't told anyone she's with child again. Sarah described complications that won't manifest until labor. A twisted cord. A breech presentation. She told me exactly how to handle each problem. The camera pulls back to show more of the entry. When I asked Sarah how she could know these things, she looked at me with eyes like deep water and said, "Time moves differently when you're between places, Adelaide. I can see the threads of what will be because I stand where what was and what is and what will be all met." Her voice echoed, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. Night falls over the Morrison property. The well is now surrounded by a perfect circle of dead grass, and strange lights dance just above its opening. But perhaps the most chilling account comes from Thomas Morrison himself, or the thing that appeared to be Thomas Morrison. On the evening of October 12th, he visited Pastor Jeremiah Whitcomb at the church, interior of a small, austere church. A figure that might be Thomas Morrison sits in the front pew, but his outline seems to shift and waver like heat distortion. Pastor Whitcomb wrote, "Thomas Morrison came to make his confession tonight. What he told me, God help me, I cannot repeat it. But he spoke of bargains made in desperation, of gifts that came with prices that weren't apparent until payment was due. He said the well behind his house was never just a well. It was a mouth, and it had been feeding on his family slowly, invisibly for 2 years. Wind moves through the church, causing candles to flicker. When I asked Thomas what would happen next, he said, 'We have to give back what we took, Pastor. All of it. The health, the prosperity, the gifts, they were never ours to keep, and the only way to give them back.' He couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Dear God, I understood. The well again, but now the camera slowly begins to descend toward the opening, as if being drawn in." October 13th, 1847, the final day. At dawn, every member of the Morrison family was seen by at least 3 witnesses performing their daily routines. Sarah draws water from the well. Thomas, lighting his forge. Elizabeth checking on her patients. James organizing his tools. Mary picking flowers in the garden. Multiple quick shots show these activities, but each one looks increasingly unreal. The figures move too smoothly, their actions too perfect, like actors performing roles they've rehearsed for eternity. But, as the sun set on October 13th, something changed. One by one, townspeople reported seeing the Morrison family walking toward their house from different directions around town. Not hurrying, not running, walking with the slow, inevitable pace of people fulfilling an appointment they could no longer avoid. Recreation shows the 5 Morrison family members converging on their property from different paths, their movements perfectly synchronized despite the distance between them. At exactly midnight, Martha Hensley, who had been watching the Morrison property with growing dread, saw all 5 members of the family gather around the well. They stood there for what felt like hours, holding hands in a circle, their faces turned upward to a sky they could no longer see. 5 voices sing in harmony, but the harmony is impossible. Notes that shouldn't exist, frequencies that seem to vibrate in the bones rather than the ears. And then one by one they stepped forward and disappeared into the well. Not fell, disappeared, as if the darkness swallowed them whole. By dawn on October 14th, Martha Hensley had summoned half the town to the Morrison property. Recreation shows townspeople gathered around the well, staring down into depths that seemed to go on forever. They found the bodies at the bottom, 60 feet down, 30 feet deeper than the well had ever been. The 5 members of the Morrison family, perfectly preserved, lying in a circle with their hands still clasped together. Their eyes were open, staring upward with expressions of peace. Terrible, impossible peace. Water drips, echoing in vast underground spaces. Modern-day construction site. Early morning. Heavy machinery sits silent, workers standing around the excavation looking confused and frightened. March 15, 2024. 7:23 a.m. Construction workers at the site of the planned Millhaven Valley Shopping Center have been digging for 3 weeks when their excavator hits something that stops them cold. Not stone, not bedrock, something that shouldn't exist. Construction foreman Mike Santos, 38, still wearing his hard hat, appears clearly shaken. I've been in construction for 20 years. I know what we're supposed to find down there. Rocks, maybe some old foundations, normal stuff. What we found was a well shaft that goes down further than our equipment can measure. He pauses, rubbing his face. But here's the thing that's got everyone spooked. The well shaft is directly under where the old Morrison house used to stand. We're talking about a construction site that's supposed to be empty land, but we're finding architecture that matches historical records from 177 years ago, preserved like it was built yesterday. Drone footage shows the excavation site. The camera slowly zooms in on a perfectly circular stone opening in the earth. The Morrison well, exposed for the first time since 1847. What the construction crew discovered wasn't just the Morrison family well. It was an entire underground structure, chambers, tunnels, and passages that extend far beyond what any family would have built for water storage. Dr. James Whitmore, hydrogeologist, now stands at the edge of the excavation, gesturing toward the exposed structure. This isn't a well in any conventional sense. What we're looking at is a natural cave system that's been modified, expanded, turned into something almost architectural. The stonework down there shows tool marks, but the tools that made those marks don't match anything used in 1840s construction. He points to strange curving lines carved into the exposed stone. These symbols, these patterns, they're carved into the stone walls going down at least 60 feet. My team has used ground-penetrating radar, and the structure continues down, much further than that. We may be looking at something that predates European settlement by centuries, or longer. Close-up shots reveal the carved symbols. They're intricate, almost organic, resembling root systems or branching rivers more than any human language. Dr. Whitmore's team made another discovery that sent shockwaves through the small community of researchers studying the Morrison case. 3 weeks into the excavation, they found something that shouldn't exist, something that challenges everything we think we know about the Morrison family tragedy. In a laboratory setting, Dr. Whitmore holds up a glass container with what appears to be a piece of weathered wood. This is a piece of the wooden bucket that Sarah Morrison used to draw water from the well. We found it preserved in a pocket of unusual sediment 63 feet down. But here's what's impossible. Carbon dating shows this wood to be over 400 years old. The Morrison family arrived in 1845. This bucket predates their arrival by centuries. Long pause as the implications sink in. Either our dating is wrong, which I doubt, or the Morrison family didn't dig this well. They found it, and whatever they found down there had been waiting for a very long time. Dr. Marcus Holloway, professor of religious studies and folklore, explains, the symbols carved into the well walls match patterns found in pre-Columbian spiritual sites throughout New England. But there's something else, something that connects this discovery to similar sites across North America, Europe, and Asia. He opens a book filled with photographs of ancient sites. These are all places where indigenous peoples reported thin places, locations where the boundary between our world and something else was permeable. The Morrison well sits at the center of what the Abenaki people called a spirit hole, a place where the earth opened to other realms. Aerial shot shows Millhaven Valley with the excavation site at the center. Strange patterns in the landscape become visible from this height. Circular formations in the forest, unusual vegetation growth patterns, all radiating out from the Morrison property. But the most disturbing discovery came when the excavation team decided to drain the water from the bottom of the well shaft. What they found there would bring the Morrison family story into the present day in ways no one expected. Mike Santos appears again, now looking deeply troubled. We used pumps to clear the water out, thinking we'd find maybe some old artifacts, bones, normal archaeological stuff. What we found? Man, I still have nightmares about it. He takes a deep breath. 5 wooden coffins, handmade, perfectly preserved, arranged in a circle at the bottom. When we lifted them out, they were empty, all of them. But the wood was warm to the touch, and I swear to God, when we opened them, there was a sound like breathing. Footage shows the 5 empty coffins laid out in a laboratory. They're beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings that seem to move in the changing light. The coffins contained no bodies, but they weren't truly empty. Each one held a single item: Sarah's herbal journal, Thomas's blacksmith hammer, Elizabeth's midwifery tools, James's woodworking implements, and Mary's collection of pressed flowers, all perfectly preserved, as if they'd been placed there yesterday. Dr. Reeves examines Sarah's journal under laboratory conditions. The psychological implications of this discovery are staggering. It suggests that the Morrison family prepared for their death, not just accepted it, but planned for it. These items represent their life's work, their gifts to the community, preserved as if waiting for someone to continue their legacy. She opens the journal carefully, but there's something else. The final pages of Sarah's journal contain entries dated after the family's death. October 14th, 15th, 16th. Detailed observations of the town's reaction to their disappearance, accurate descriptions of the search efforts, even predictions about the future of Millhaven Valley. Close-up shows journal pages with dates that shouldn't exist. October 16th, 1847. The town mourns us, but they don't understand. We haven't left. We've simply moved between places. The well was never a source of water. It was a doorway, and now we are the guardians of that doorway, ensuring that what lies beneath never rises to the surface. Night shot shows the excavation site. Strange lights dance above the exposed well opening, and the shadows seem to move independently of any light source. The gifts we gave the community came with a price, but not the price anyone imagined. We didn't sell our souls. We became anchors, tethering something ancient and hungry to prevent it from consuming everything above. This is our covenant, our eternal watch. And someday, when the earth is disturbed again, when the well is opened, again the people of Millhaven Valley will understand what we sacrificed for them. Father Michael Torres stands at the excavation site. I've been coming here every day since the discovery. Not in any official capacity. The church isn't involved in the archaeological work. But I come to pray, because I can feel it. Something down there that's aware, that's watching, that's waiting. He looks toward the well opening. The Morrison family didn't die. They transformed. They became something between human and spirit. Guardians standing watch over forces that predate Christianity, predate European settlement, maybe predate human civilization itself. Margaret Chen stands at the edge of the excavation, wind blowing, her hair as she looks down into the depths. My family has lived in Millhaven Valley for 4 generations. We've always known there was something special about this place, something that made our crops grow better, our winters milder, our children healthier than surrounding communities. She pauses, emotional. Now I understand. The Morrison family is still here, still protecting us, still maintaining the balance between our world and whatever lies beneath. And we never even knew to thank them. Sunset falls over Millhaven Valley. The excavation site is now covered with a temporary structure, but strange lights still flicker around its edges. The excavation has been officially suspended pending further archaeological review. But the construction workers, the researchers, and the townspeople of Millhaven Valley all report the same phenomena. Sounds of voices echoing from the covered well, the scent of herbs and fresh bread carried on impossible winds, and glimpses of figures walking the hills at twilight, a family of 5, holding hands, watching over the community they died to protect. Final scene shows Mike Santos standing in front of his construction trailer. We won't be building the shopping center. The land's been donated to the state as a historical site, but honestly, even if they offered us triple pay, none of my crew would come back here. Because we all know the truth now. He looks back toward the covered excavation. The Morrison family isn't gone. They're exactly where they've always been, standing between us and something that would destroy everything we hold dear. And as long as they're there, watching, waiting, protecting, maybe that's exactly how it should be. Nell. Shot shows the Morrison property at twilight. The wind stirs the grass, and for just a moment, 5 figures seem to stand silhouetted against the dying light. A family eternal, guardians of mysteries that some doors should never open. The Morrison family was loved by their community. They gave everything they had to protect that community, and in the end they gave something more. They gave their humanity itself, transforming into eternal sentinels standing watch over secrets that the earth was never meant to surrender. 5. Voices in harmony sing a lullaby that seems to rise from deep underground, beautiful and heartbreaking and infinite. They were loved. They are loved. They will always be loved, and they will never ever stop loving us back. The singing continues for several seconds in complete darkness, then slowly fades to silence. In memory of the Morrison family, Thomas, Sarah, Elizabeth, James, and Mary. Guardians of Millhaven Valley. 1845, Eternal. The End.